Hello everyone, and welcome back to another GIS lecture video. And in this lecture video, I want to talk about another type of spatial analysis tool called identity. And so to recap where we left off last time, we talked about this idea of intersect creating a new output where you only had the geometry of the overlaps between the inputs and the attributes of each input were included in the output. Okay? So today we're going to talk about something similar, and we're going to talk about this idea of identity. Let's go ahead and give us a little bit more room here. We're going to talk about this idea of identity. Right? And so identity works similarly to intersect in the sense that you're generating an output of overlaps, but you're also retaining the original geometry of the first input. So in this case, we actually do have to worry about which features are which, okay? So you're going to generate an output of overlaps, a new output of overlaps, but also keep any geometry from the input layer that does not overlap. Right, so you're generating output of overlaps just like with intersect, but you're also retaining the geometry of the input layer that does not overlap. And then again, right, attributes from both layers are copied over. Right, so it generates a new output focusing on overlaps just like intersect did, but you're also keeping the geometry from the first input layer that does not overlap, and you're pulling over attributes from both. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at an example. And what I want to do is I actually want to use the same example as before, where we have our four wetlands here. Right? And they have their types. So we have fen, coastal, marsh, and wooded. Right? And then again, we're going to have a set of construction sites with their owners. So Jones, Smith, Marcus, and do Carl. Right, so we have our fens or our wetlands, and we have our construction sites. Right, this is the same setup as before. I've just reduced the number of construction sites a little bit, just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so this is the big thing that differentiates identity from intersect, is that we have to label one of these as the input feature So we're going to call the wetlands the input feature. And we're going to call the construction site the identity feature. Identity feature. Right. And this is an important distinction because what it does is it means that this input feature, all of the geometry is going to be kept, along with the places where the construction sites overlap it. Okay? So let's take a look at what happens when we run our identity tool. Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the areas of overlap, right? So we have this one, this here, 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 and here, right? So this is just like what we did with the intersect, okay? And indeed, we're going to draw them, and I'm going to draw this in a different color. Let's have the output be purple, right? So we're going to draw them to the best of my ability, right? We're going to draw the overlapping areas, okay? So if I move this over just a touch, okay. And then we'll have this overlapping area here, this overlapping area here, this overlapping area down here. Right, and so if we number them, right, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right? This is looking exactly like intersect at this point. But there's the other piece, right? We've done the overlaps, but also keeps any geometry from the input layer that does not overlap. Right? And so we specified that that the wetlands were the input layer, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to have additional polygons. Now I'm regretting trying to make them all wiggly and complicated because I'm not going to be able to keep that similar, but right, but what we've done, right, so now we can go back and number these. So we had 6, so this would be 7. Keeps wanting to look like a 2. This would be 7, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So our original set had 4 wetland polygons that were whole. We ran intersect. We ended up with 6 new polygons that represent the overlapping areas, as well as the original, what was left of the original 4 polygons, right? So let's talk about attributes for a second. Well, before we do that, pause the video, go back, rewatch what just happened, because this idea that we're keeping the original geometry that was not overlapped hopefully is straightforward, but is really important to understanding what we're about to do next with attributes and what makes identity different from intersect. So again, just to recap what happened, right? We did the overlaps, 1 to 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, but then we also kept all of the original geometry that was not overlapped, right? So the rest of Fen came over as well, okay? So we have a total of 10 polygons instead of just the original 6 that would have come over if we had just done intersect, So let's scroll down for a second and let's talk about attributes. So we have our output, right? And this output has the geometry of the overlapping areas as well as the geometry of the input explicitly, right? And the input we said was the wetlands, right? And so let's go ahead and look at the attribute table for the output. Output attribute table. Okay, so what do we have? Well, anywhere there was an overlap, so let's look at 1, 2, and 3, and then jump down, and then we'll look at 7, 8, and 9. Right, so there's a gap here, we're just gonna skip. So let's look at 1, 2, and 3. Well, for 1, 2, and 3, right, these are overlaps, just like with intersect. And we said that both layers' attributes are copied over, right? So for 1, for example, it's going to pull the type from the wetland part of the overlap, which is fen. And then it's going to pull the owner attribute from the construction site part of the overlap, which is Jones. Right, so for right now, this is very similar to what we did for intersect. Right, for 2, we're going to do the same thing. 2 is going to be fen, right, because we're pulling the type attribute from the overlap with the wetland, and the owner is going to be, in this case, Smith. Right, again, pulling from the construction site part of the overlap. For the coastal, right, for 3, we're pulling from the coastal type. And then for the owner, right, we're pulling, again, it's going to be Smith. Okay, so this is just like what we did with intersect. But, and here's the big but, let's jump down the attribute table, right? We have these other pieces, 7, 8, 9, and 10, that were the original wetland, or what's left of the original wetlands. What do they have? Well, they still have a type, right? 7 still has a type. Actually, let's number these. Ooh, let's number these just so that we're clear on where things are coming from. Right? 7, 8, 9, 10. 7, right, still has a type, right? It's still fen. Right, it's still fen. But what about its owner? Right, there's an owner field now in the attribute table. What about its owner? Well, it doesn't have one, right? There's no owner for this middle portion of this wetland, right? It's not overlapping any of the construction sites. So what it gets is a special type called null. And null basically means that there is nothing there, right? It's a placeholder for an empty piece of data, okay? So what about 8? Well, 8 is going to have the same problem that 7 did, right? It's going to have a type. It's going to have coastal, right? Again, because we're just looking at the type of the wetland part. In terms of owner, though, right? Again, there's no owner here, right? There's no overlap for polygon 8, or what would be polygon 8, right? Because polygon 8, just to be abundantly clear, right? Polygon 8 is everything that was left over, right, after the overlap. So there is no owner for type 8, so it's again going to get that special thing of null, meaning that there is no data here, okay? And then finally, just to be abundantly clear, let's look at 9. Okay. So 9, again, 9, 9. The type is going to be marsh, because again, we're pulling over this attribute from the unoverlapped part of the wetland, which was the input feature. And then again, for owner, right, there's no overlap here. So what it's going to get is it's going to get, again, this null. Okay? So hopefully that made sense. The difference between identity and intersect, in the sense that both of them look at overlapping areas, but the identity specifies one layer as input, and it retains the geometry from that layer regardless of overlap. So that's what these 4 big polygons here were. And in terms of the output attributes, anywhere there is overlap, you end up with both the attributes, just like intersect. But in areas where there is not overlap, you end up with these special null values showing that there is no data available for those attributes because there was no overlap with the input feature. Okay? Hopefully this makes sense, and if you have any questions, as always, please reach out. Thank you.